and then into Germany and Spain before being sold for $700 million. Wenceslao, it's great to have a role model like you here for the young entrepreneurs in the audience, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of examples of companies that have started out life in South America or Spain that have gone global and been huge successes. Why aren't we seeing more?
I want to believe it's just a matter of time. I think we are seeing that with bigger companies across the region. For the first time, we have Latin American multinationals that are either doing very well in their industries across the world, or even leading in their industry, like the case of InBev or Cemex, or a few others now. And they're big companies, they're established companies, and that wasn't the case only 10 or 15 years ago. We are beginning to see that for large established companies, and I would expect to begin to see that hopefully soon in smaller, more innovative companies that can come out of Latin America and go to the rest of the world.
What for you are the major factors holding companies back from succeeding globally?
I don't know. I would suspect that one factor is the examples and the few successful examples of innovative technology companies we have in Latin America are like Patagon, copycats or Me Too kind of companies, where we saw something that was working well in the developed world, usually in Silicon Valley, and we applied that before someone else did in Latin America. And examples are powerful, and so a lot of people see these examples and try to do something similar. I think it's only a matter of time before we see, for the first time, a Facebook kind of company, or a Hotmail kind of company, or a Google kind of company come out of Latin America. And that would be a different kind of example, a very powerful one, and I would bet that we will see that in the next 5 years.
Okay, thanks. Ola, would you agree with that? Your company Result has helped over 200 companies go global. So, are you seeing examples of real traction in South America or Spain?
Well, maybe start a couple of words about myself. I started the first company in '97. It was an e-commerce company. We wanted to take it pan-European. We had 1 million people buying CDs and home entertainment back in '97. And every time we crossed the country border in Europe, it was an invisible wall that we hit with full speed. It was so small things, but they changed everything. They changed the business model. They changed so much. So for us to go pan-European was very, very difficult. A couple of years later, we started Result, helping companies go international. And the first thing, if you look at Spanish companies and many South American companies, why they don't succeed in going international, is that they never try. And why don't they try? Well, it depends very much on the size of the whole market. If you look at Israel, local sales, that's a distraction. Everybody wants to go to the US or some other bigger market. If you look at American companies, they usually do $50 million in sales before they start going international. I'm Swedish, and in Sweden, ever since the Vikings, we've gone elsewhere to find fun and money and other things, and it's very cold and so forth. And our dream is to work really hard, and then we can go live in Spain. You guys already live in Spain. So for us, when the company is doing 2 million euros in sales, it's going international. And for us, every business plan starts out with putting an international board together, a company where the management speaks English, and it's prepared very early on for going international. I think that's another differentiator. But I think that as the world becomes smaller and smaller, at least in consumption patterns, there's absolutely no reason why companies shouldn't come from here and from South America and go global.
Okay, Germán, your company helps Spanish companies go into Silicon Valley. If Ola says there's no reason why you can't go global, it's not as easy as it looks, right? And so tell us a little bit about some of the difficulties Spanish companies have when they try to go into the U.S.
One of the reasons we decided to create this company, StepOne, this was created by Bernardo Hernandez and myself, and then Javier Olivan from Facebook joined, and he's helping a lot. One of the things was that, they are used to see many Spanish companies try to go over there. It's not a question of technology. We have technology, we have talent, we have people. It's questions, as you said, about details, about perceptions, about before going there, you should be very well prepared. But from one little study we did, we believe that around 25% of the technological companies in Spain, and I don't know too much about Latin, but I believe it would be more or less the same. Think about 25% of every market, they have big probability and potential of being successful. The only thing they need to do before they step over there to be really prepared in two ways. Human team, not to be just a technological company, but to be a real company. And on the other side is adapt your business model and your strategy. If you do that, then you will increase a lot your chances of going over there.
Okay, so what are the differences between starting a company? You've started two companies in South America and a company in Silicon Valley. So what do you see as the differences? If you have to adapt your business plan, you have to adapt your approach, how would you describe that process?
I would say for me the first big difference is with the natural friction of doing business in Latin America. Until you do things outside of Latin America, particularly in the US, I didn't realize how difficult some very basic things were, from incorporating a company to hiring and firing people to drafting and enforcing contracts. That's a lot easier. I find that when I'm executing in Latin America, I am 50% of the time at least, if not more, playing goalie, making sure, and that's my priority, making sure that they don't score against me. And 40% of the time, whatever's left, sometimes less, trying to see how I score. Whereas when I am executing in Silicon Valley, I find 80% of the time, and my priority is to try to see how I score. And only 20% of the time I'm playing goalie, making sure I don't get scores against me.
If you could snap your fingers and change things, like what could governments, for example, do in Latin America to make life easier for entrepreneurs? What could help change things so that it would be easier to start a company, so that venture capitalists would be more willing to come into the market?
If I could push a button and change one thing, I would dramatically improve elementary and middle school education, elementary school and high school. And I think that would create an enormous amount of entrepreneurs, and that by itself would change the things that need to change to make it more frictionless. But right now, the number of people that can aspire to participate in this global economy of technology and innovation, it's minimal. By definition, you need someone that can read and write, can add, subtract, and it would be great if they can speak English, and that's a very, very, very small percentage of the population.
It's also an attitude question, I think, in most schools. In Swedish schools, I suppose it's the same here. You learn to play football, and in Swedish schools you learn how to cook meatballs, but you never say the word entrepreneurship for the whole elementary school. You never do get prepared for creating companies, the ones that we're talking about right now. There's a complete confusion between being an entrepreneur who's baking bread to support his family and somebody who tries to create Google or something else. So there should be different words and different attitudes, I think, very early on. We have a Swedish entrepreneur who always wears an ice hockey team t-shirt because it's okay if you're a sportsman to make money. So he has that in all sort of public speeches and so forth, just as a statement against this.
So, what, in your mind, you're a global champion in kickboxing. In your mind, you know, what are the similarities with being a good entrepreneur, and how could people?
That's, so in a previous life I was a kickboxing world champion, and people said, but you don't look like a kickboxer. That's the whole point. The other guy should look like a kickboxer. But it's a terrible sport, because even if you win, you get beaten up, and there's no money, and there's no red carpets and so forth. But it's a very exciting sport, and I think that's something I brought with me from that experience, was that all athletes fail. Failure is a constant. You fail, and then you're very happy when you win. But in society, very often, if somebody fails once, that's a loser. So I think that athletes have the ability to come back and train harder and see that as a part of the fabric of success. And I think that's something that one can bring with. Also the need for that excitement that sort of pushes you to do things that you're really afraid of doing. I think that's another thing that could be brought into entrepreneurship.
How, you know, that brings up cultural issues and cultural barriers. I remember once meeting a Spanish entrepreneur who kept on the homepage of his laptop that famous video of Steve Ballmer jumping up and down, yelling, "I love this company." And he said, "I make myself watch it every day because it reminds me what I'm up against with the American competition. Because Americans tend to be, you know, hugely enthusiastic, and they know how to market things and get people excited about their companies. So, you know, as people have said, you know, there's great technology in Spain and South America, great technologists, but if you can't sell it, if you can't market it, you're not going to be the one that wins. So how do we fix that?
Very clear with preparation and adaptation, and being really focused on what we want to do. Very focused and very well prepared. You know, we are talking about, for example, the US is an Occidental culture, and it seems like they are like we are, but they are completely different. Moreover, there has almost nothing to do East Coast from West Coast, from... You must realize that the US, they are 52 states with different rules, so it's a complex world. So I believe that before jumping into there, if you really get very well prepared, adapted, and learn the details of the cultures, mostly on what not to do, I think you would have done a great step towards that.
So, okay. Going up against the Americans in their home market is going to be a challenge. What about using the expertise and knowledge that you have in a market like Argentina or Brazil? You've built a new company, Lemon Bank, that does microfinance payments for the unbanked. Why not leverage that knowledge and take those technologies out into the BRIC and into some of the other BRIC countries, because there you have an advantage over the Americans. You have a better understanding of the problems from the ground up. Do you see more companies, you know, moving from South America to India and China, Russia, for example?
Banco Lemon in Brazil, by chance, became one of the largest payment networks in the country, and we learned a lot about the business of processing small ticket transactions, and we were surprised with how efficiently you can do that today, using today's best technology and best practices. And when we looked at going outside of Brazil, we did look at India, China with some partners, but ironically the most interesting market we found to take it was the US market, because card payments were developed in the US, and because of that they have more legacy and they are more behind both in processing of payments, the cost of payments, and also in the mobile adoption and penetration, the way that Americans are using mobiles, and we found an interesting gap that we think it's going to close, and we wanted to be part of the trend that closes that gap. So counterintuitively, instead of going to India or China, we chose to go to the US.
But it's quite interesting how local we are in our thinking. If I speak to an Argentinian company, we have an office there. They want to go to Brazil or maybe Mexico. If I speak to a Finnish company, they're dreaming about Sweden. A Ukrainian company wants to go to Russia. So we're extremely local in our thinking. And we call that the proximity theory. Everybody gravitates towards the market close to them. And we try to enforce the spaceman theory. If you're a spaceman landing with your company on Earth, where should you land? Because it costs as much to start an office in Stockholm as it does in Beijing. And it might be a smarter idea because it's closer. There are a lot of good reasons to be close to your home market, but there's also a lot of good reasons to be in a much larger market. So we see that a growing business for us is to go to companies in Northern Europe and say, do you want to go to Brazil? And they say no. And then we can pay to take their companies there and sell it back to them when it's successful. Because they completely underestimate the value of larger, more fast-growing markets.
Okay. How does your business model work? So if a company in Spain says, look, I want to go to the US and I have no clue how to do it, how do you charge them? What do you do to help them?
The first thing is very important is to select, is to identify not all the companies, just for being technological companies, can succeed in the US. So first, what we do is to analyze and to study if this company can be really a star, if there is a market for it. So the first thing we do is, if this company has real potential in the US, plus if there is willingness, if the management team, if the company really wants to go for that market. Because we see many times many companies just going, coming with no compromise. So the willingness side of the human part of the company has to be very aligned with the model. So once we define that this company may be a star, we work into phases. The first phase is the preparation. We have offices in Silicon Valley and Madrid, and very important, most of the people that works in the company are from the US, because we believe that if you are from US and if you come from a top university such as Harvard, Stanford, whatever, you have a great network, you know about the market, and you have those details on the culture because you lived in there. So that's very important to notice, to have people from there that have already worked. So the preparation of the people and the adaptation of the business model and strategy, that is phase one. And on that we charge project fees. And once they are ready and they have clear goals, okay, then we help them everything to establish in the US. Since that point that we accompany them to the meetings and to everything, we charge success fees. So they are not clients, they are partners, and we align their success with our success. So that is more or less how we work.
I think all of you would probably agree that for every company, timing is everything. So, during the bubble, the last bubble, a number of companies tried to expand internationally too fast, and they burned too much money, and they failed. But on the other hand, we quite often see in Europe, companies wait too long. They say, oh, we're going to build up our business over X number of years in our home market, then we'll roll out to the next country, that's closest to us, etc. And they lose momentum, and they lose the market to a more fleet-footed competitor, quite often in the US. So how does a company figure out when is the right time in its life to go global and move outside its home market? Do you have a view on that, Ola?
Yeah, it depends quite a lot. And if you refer to the dot-com boom, where everybody wanted a quick European rollout with an easily scalable e-commerce solution, contradictions in terms, these companies were almost always rolled out for the wrong reasons. For financial reasons, to go to the NASDAQ, and not having the user in mind. So I think that if you see user traction and if you see that all the numbers are aligned, for instance, we engage with companies when they're hugely successful in their home market, and when they are, we then copy that model to other countries together with the entrepreneurs. So we don't take business idea risk very often. We more often take execution risk. And I think that you should wait until you're successful somewhere before you try to go elsewhere. I think that's if you can't get the model right, you're scaling shit, and that's not good.
Now, what lessons did you learn in rolling out Patagon? Did you make some mistakes that, you know, in hindsight you would have done differently? What could you share with the audience about what you learned in building that global company?
What we were replicating them was very similar in each country, the model. We would acquire a broker-dealer, shut off the offline operations, turn it online into exclusively online, and market it aggressively. I would say that it was, from the commercial marketing point of view, fairly straightforward. The complications were more in the execution and the logistical back end.
Okay. What, in your mind, are the mistakes that entrepreneurs make the most often?
It's hard to say. I think we all make a lot of mistakes, and I would say that they tend to be very different. I think one fairly common mistake is to, before we found a product or a service that has traction, because I think we all start with something we believe has traction, but we haven't tested it. And we will go through a number of iterations until we find the traction we're looking for. And a very common mistake is to put too much money and too much effort in general behind a product or a service before we have some hint of traction. And very often you will find companies that by the time they do have that, find that traction and say, oops, I know what it is. They are running out of money, and it's a terrible place to be.
Would you agree with that, Ola, or do you have anything to add to the list?
Yeah, I mean, you can't look at the scoreboards when playing football. You have to look at the ball. And sometimes when venture capital comes in, or sometimes when sort of journalists write that you have to get into apps now, then it creates the wrong kind of pressure. So people start making decisions to be able to raise the next round or to do other things. Brilliant example from the old days is Boo.com. I don't know if you all remember Boo.com. They burned through 200 million euros in 18 months. I saw a company yesterday called Zoo Village. There's 6 people, they're selling exactly the same things as Boo.com is selling, and they make 6 million euros in profit. So it's 1 million euro in profit per person. But they've been going at it for 10 years. They've been doing nice profits all along. But they love the product, they love the user, they try, they measure. They don't go for the sort of, let's invest $1 billion, this is a great idea. I don't believe in that model anymore. There's some home runs, but for every home run, it's very packed on the graveyard. And I don't think that's sound business. If you can try it, and you can try service very cost efficiently now. You can have it, all the development, all the capacity up in the cloud. You can try it with Google and others to see if there's traction. And it's very easy to see if the idea at least has some sort of legs before you start investing in it heavily. And another point I'd like to make is, I think that entrepreneurs are too much swimming in the same direction. So I think that being contrarian, so if you're a journalist, you have to write sort of about good things in good times, bad things in bad times. And if you're an investor, you invest when it's cheap and you sell when it's expensive. But as an entrepreneur, you have to go to work even though you're not the flavor of the month. And you have to believe in a vision. And I think that's a very important thing to remember. For instance, we buy print magazines now because everybody wants to sell them and are afraid of them. We buy print magazines. We have a pretty good idea of how they can be leveraged into something much cooler. So contrarian, I think that's an important thing.
Okay. What about you? What are the mistakes that you see most often?
There are, like everyone, there are several, but many, mostly entrepreneurs, when they raise an idea, they think that their idea or their project are the only one, and they don't check really in the market that. I always tell them, listen, your idea may be great, but you have to make sure that that it has a differentiation, that's value, because there are many talent around there, and many entrepreneurs, and many people. So you have to make sure that you have a spot, or that when you are going to do it, you are going to do it better than the others. And then you need to test it. So I agree with them, and I would add that please study very well the market before.
What about getting the team right? Because how often do you see companies where the minute you meet them you think, this guy should not be the CEO? Because quite often it's the technologist who has the great technology, but he's not a business guy, and he's not the one who's going to lead the company to success. So, and it's very difficult for a founder to let go and let somebody else come in and take the reins. So, how often do you see that, and what would you advise? Because in Europe in particular, I think in Europe, and probably, and you can tell me if this is true, in South America, the big disadvantage is that there's no intersection of disciplines in the universities. So in the U.S., if you're a business major, if you're a technologist, if you're an engineer, you're going to take business classes, you're going to take public speaking, you're going to have the things that you need to build a company. That's not at all the case in Europe, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen startup pitches here from companies where after you listen to the pitch, you still don't know what the company does, and you're not sure what they're looking for, and they all claim there's no competition. So everybody sort of rolls their eyes, and you think, somebody's got to come in there and have more focus. So,
yeah, but Europe is a set of rules that we need. It's not the cultural affinity. It's not the geographical affinity, necessarily. So if you are in Latvia and you are in Greece, they know nothing about each other. Absolutely nothing. But they both know a lot more about the US. So we can say that we're European, but if you try to go pan-European, you'll see a lot of things that you didn't know. So that's a very big difference. So there is no cluster. I mean, there's a lot of smart people in Madrid and in Barcelona and in Stockholm, but if you go to Silicon Valley, it's like going to Hollywood if you're an artist, or if you're an actor. And then you'll be a waitress, of course, pretending that you're an actor. But still, if you go there, there's a big chance that there's a lot of people that knows a lot about movies, and that's a cluster. We need to build these clusters. And I think it's happening. It's happening at events like this. It's happening more and more and more. But behind successful companies, there's an invisible ecosystem enabling them to be successful. There's no surprise that YouTube is successful. Because Chad Hurley was in PayPal and knew everybody and had the right backers and so forth. So there's a lot of invisible success enablers that we often forget in Europe.
Okay.
I would argue that in a company that is in any kind of startup, you are betting on the people, on the team that you are meeting. And if you feel there should be any important change in that team, like you think the CEO is too much of a technologist and should be replaced with someone who is more of a business person, and if that change is not coming up from the team, I think I would just pass on it altogether. I think you can do those sort of changes, or I think that's worth it when you're looking at a company that is 200 million in revenue or something like that. But an early stage company, you're betting much more on the people than you are on the idea, and if you very much like the idea but you're not very convinced with the team for whatever reasons, I think I haven't seen examples where making those changes are very, very, very productive. Even if the idea is great.
Okay. When are we going to, do you believe, because your latest company, Bling Nation, was founded in the U.S., do you think that, it's still kind of absolutely necessary to either go into the U.S. or create your company in the U.S. to make it, or do you believe that going forward we will see successful global companies out of South America and Europe that stay there but go global and become billion-dollar plus companies, or will the U.S. continue to be kind of the center of gravity?
The only reason we founded Bling Nation in the US is because payments in the US is a $60 billion market, and it was going to be just as difficult to do it anywhere else, so why not try where the biggest price is. But I do believe that we will begin to see global companies come out of Latin America. There's no reason why something like Twitter or Facebook or Google or you name it, even Cisco, could come out of Latin America. And I think it's just a matter of time. When you see the way that people who are 15 years old to 20 years old have embraced mobile phones in Latin America, I would argue that they have embraced it more intimately than in many of the developed markets around the world. And you would expect that people who use it much more intensely, who use the mobile phones much more intensely, will come up with things and business models that the developed world will not come up with, but that they can use just as well.
To a certain extent, the market's been held back in places like Brazil, for example, because the hardware, the mobile hardware, is taxed by the government, and the services, both voice and data, remain very, very expensive. But eventually, I'm sure that will change. There'll be more competition in the market, prices will drop, and because of that intensive usage, we might see, an explosion, and that could lead to more innovation.
Or even before those things changes, in the bank we have millions of people as customers who cannot even give us an address, a physical address, and they do not have a bank account, they do not have any sort of social security number, but they do have a mobile phone, and they use it, they carry it all the time, and they will do things with it and interact with it in ways that people in the US do not yet. So I think there is a fertile ground there for innovative solutions and uses to come out of the emerging markets to the rest of the world. And I use mobile as an example because it's very obvious when you spend some time in any emerging market how prevalent mobiles are and how they have incorporated into the daily life of most everybody. But you can use it in other examples too. If you were to spend any time in any cyber cafe in any emerging market, but I do that when I can in Latin America. You go to a somewhat humble neighborhood and you spend an hour where people go just to check the internet because most people do not have internet or computer at home. You cannot avoid thinking something has to come out of it. These guys are doing things with this technology and this equipment that we don't know how to do, and they will teach us something. They will innovative business models will come out of that, I think.
Okay.
I would like to make a point on that. I believe it's very important to start working on the brand, meaning, for example, the US is not just an end. It may be sometimes the road, for example, for a Spanish technological company to sell in Europe. It's very hard to cross the Pyrenees. There is a cultural, anyone that is in the technology side, they know that there are big cultural barriers. It's very difficult to sell in UK or in Germany or in France Spanish technology. Okay? Not in clean tech, but yes in IT. So I believe we should, in order to really be able to start global companies from Latin and Spain, we have to work on branding. We must say, hey, our technology is as good as any other else. That problem you don't find it as much in the US. In the US they are more open. It's hard, but they don't have so many prejudices.
It's easier to sell your stuff if you're a Spanish company and you've been a success in the US, then it's easier to sell into the Western
with
world.
the Silicon Valley brand or the US brand. And for example, one example is in the renewable energies. We have good brand in the US, and that made good brand in the rest of the world. So institutions need to invest in branding.
Yeah, but there's also an attitude issue, because if you start out with an international outlook, I was part of when Martin Wysawski started FOM, it was stellar US investors, it was international teams on the board, it was a truly international company, global prominence, but Madrid headquartered. So that's another way of doing it. So I agree that if it would have been everything Spanish, then it might have been more difficult to go to Japan and say, we're a Spanish startup, we're going to conquer Japan. But with the right international components, it's a fantastic story of how you can sort of leverage international, but do it from Spain, being an Argentinian. So it's and hopefully we'll hear more about that later on today.
Go ahead.
I also want to pick up a little bit on what you say about the team. When people say entrepreneur, it's like if it's the same type of person all the time. It's not. After the dot-com boom, I got grey hair in 4 months, and sort of everything I believed in didn't seem to be true. We believed in e-commerce and communities and video and all kinds of other things. And then I spent a year just reading industrial history, and that ended up with a book called Mission Possible. It's about entrepreneurship. And I found 6 very clear types of entrepreneurs. And if you don't understand why somebody is building a company, it's very difficult to help them. So some people, they just get a mad vision. I call them the all or nothing entrepreneur. They're going to do this until they crash, or until they succeed. They become the most successful ones. They don't see risk as a problem at all. The other one is the serial entrepreneur. Every time you meet them, they say, well, look at my new company. So they're very different. The first case, you need to get a good CFO and sort of hold them back. The second case, you need to sort of make them focus. Then you have what we call the virtuosis. Somebody's so good at sewing, so it becomes gaultier, or cooking, so it becomes a chain of restaurants. With that person, business is not at the forefront. So they're very different types. Then the intrapreneur, people that are having a job but creating fantastic companies in spite of the fact they're in a large organization. They're the most important entrepreneurs, and we speak very little about those guys. Those guys change the world more than everyone else. And then last but not least, the false entrepreneur. The person that just talks about entrepreneurships, goes to entrepreneurs events, always have a plan. It's a non-disclosure agreement. It's very important with the title, but they're very, very unproductive. And if you work with entrepreneurship, you have to sort of find these guys and get them out of the way for the real entrepreneurs.
Okay. Well, I'm told that we're going to have to end the session, so just to wrap up, I think what we've heard today, we've seen examples of successful entrepreneurs. We have 2 guys here who are ready to help the entrepreneurs in the audience go global. So take advantage of their experience and expertise, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you all very much.